Welcome. Just going to take a minute since Zoom is taking time to let people in. Hi, everybody. One more minute and then we're going to start. Okay, hi everybody. I'm Shini Reichman. I'm the director of IPF Hatid and the director of strategic initiatives at Israel Policy Forum. You all know us. I am really glad that you're here joining us today to talk about the World Zionist Congress. I'm not going to get into why it is super important for us to all vote and be involved because that's what all of our speakers are here for. But the World Zionist Congress is very important, and frankly, there are not enough people in our Jewish community who actually know what's happening and know that they can really get involved in a productive way. It doesn't just affect a massive budget, although it does, but it also affects land acquisition, education, aliyah, religious pluralism issues, and a range of other issues that are deeply important to so many of our members in this community. And so we know that it's really important for us to invest in raising awareness around it and making sure people know what their options are for voting and make sure they actually vote. And we're super fortunate that there are a variety of slates that all promote a secure Jewish democratic Israel. We have most of them represented today. The speakers will introduce themselves, but it doesn't say whose slate is which, but I think I know the exact names of the slates. Talia Benami with Fatikva, Roy Eisenberg with Anu, a New Union, Javi Carrillo Klein with Vote Reform, or the Arts Slate, and Lauren Post with Jewish Future, which is affiliated with Yesh Atid. They'll all introduce themselves more and answer some of my questions, but we're really grateful to have a TNACE represented on all four of your slates, which represents kind of the, broadly speaking, those who promote a secure Jewish democratic Israel. Just so people know the elections are happening right now, I just want to say that. And I am going to make sure if I can figure out how to send a link into the chat to everybody here with the World Zionist Congress Israel Policy Forum website, which kind of explains how voting works and also explains what the different issues are that are relevant with that. Let me pull up my questions, which I don't have here. Sorry, guys. Wrong tab. My first question is for Rory. What is the World Zionist Congress? What does it control? Why is it significant for Jewish communities around the world? I've touched on sort of some of the issues, but I feel like the World Zionist Congress is such a mystery because it happened like 150 years ago, and then we haven't heard from it, and now we're hearing from it again. So tell us what it's actually all about.
All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Shani, and a big thanks to the IPFIT team for hosting this webinar. The World Zionist Congress was founded in 1897 by a little-known guy named Theodor Herzl. I think some of you may have heard of it, but it is true that most Jews, that is the last time they thought about the World Zionist Congress was when they learned about it in day school or at camp or in their history books. But it has remained a very influential part of the Jewish institutional ecosphere. Uh, it oversees, so the most important thing about the World Zionist Congress is that it's called the Parliament of the Jewish People. It's a deliberative and legislative body of four that oversees and regulates four major institutions in our life. First and foremost, the World Zionist Organization, and Karen Kayemet Israel, which is the Jewish National Fund everywhere but in America, and Karen Hayesod, and I think the one that's most recognizable and that we hear about most these days is the Jewish Agency. It oversees $1 billion budget, which is hard to know how it is broken up. The funding of the specific institutions and programs is actually fairly opaque. It is not like in America where there is a 990 and you can look up which program gets what money and which person gets paid, or well, the top five people and how much they get paid. None of that is publicly available. I think the only one that releases an actual report is the Jewish Agency, which we know is funded at about $330 million a year. But the Congress is split up into three major delegations. You have America, which is the election we are all running in, which gets just under a third of the seats, about 152 out of 500 seats. You have Israel, which gets the most seats, and which does its election based on the Knesset results of the year in which the Congress happens. And then the other third goes to the rest of the world, some of which hold elections, some of which are appointed by their Zionist Federation. And they meet every 5 years to basically decide the policies and the allocations for these four agencies. It's for those who were paying attention at the extraordinary Congress that happened after COVID, it was a very good time, and there was not any disagreement at all. Everyone got along very well. There were no fights about anything. And because of that, we know that this one will be a lot of fun because there were no outstanding issues that were not resolved at all about Jewish pluralism, about LGBT rights in Israel, and about to Shani's point, about land acquisition through JNF within Israel, and I think this is one of my least known facts and the most important thing about the Congress. Karen Kayemet Israel, JNF, owns 13% of the land of Israel in perpetuity for all time. And the Congress gets to decide where that land acquisition happens. And this happens because at the Congress, we all come together and get to vote. And sometimes before the Congress, within coalition, we divvy up 50% of the board seats of three of the institution, 100% of the board seats of the World Zionist Organization, as well as all of the top jobs at each of these things. So the department heads of each department within each of these organizations, which is a whole complicated thing that we would need like a 5 hour webinar for, like a whole seminar. Um, but the important thing that I want to leave with is this is the one place in the Jewish world where every single Jew gets a vote. The people who set up these institutions, the people who bought the land, the people who endowed this massive endowment, right? $1 billion a year that is allocated, they did it for all of us. The World Zionist Congress is for the Jewish people. There's no foundation name on it. Nobody put their name on it. They really did it for all of us. And it is our Jewish civic duty once every 5 years to vote so that we can have our say in how these organizations are run. Like if you remember nothing else from today, just remember that there were two elections for us in 5785. There was an election in November, and there's an election for 2 months now. And it is critical that we get as many votes as possible because while you see four slates represented here, there are many more slates on the other side who do not share our vision for what a secure Jewish and democratic state looks like.
That's right. My next question is for Javi. How are the elections unique in the United States and how many seats are allocated to this country? And if you can share with people a little bit about how it works in the rest of the world as well. And I didn't name this, but obviously all four of you are part of the IPF community and are involved with the TEED, and that is why you are here. And you're all one of several or even many on your slates, on your respective slates, who are part of our TEED family. So I just want to say that going forward.
Thanks, Shani, and thanks, Rowie. So Rowie kind of got started on answering this question of like how these seats are allocated. So the thing that makes the US unique in this is we have the biggest diasporic population. So like Rowie said, we get about a third of the seats. It comes down to of the 525 delegates, so not counting the international orgs, of the 525 elected seats, the US gets 152. So these delegates, like we talked about, are determined by the World Zionist Congress election in the US. In each country that is participating in the World Zionist Congress, the Zionist Federation of their country runs that election. So, for example, in the US, the American Zionist movement runs the US elections, etc. And so we get a third of the seats. That's like a really big influence in the World Zionist Congress. Just to paint a picture, all of the other countries get 33% of the seats, 173 delegates. So it makes it really important for the US to kind of put in their voice and vision for Israel.
Thank you, Javi. And I just want to make sure everyone saw that we did put the website for our WZC page in the chat, which also has local town halls that we're going to be hosting in almost all of our chapter cities, except in Toronto, because Canada has their own system and voting structure. Talia, now on to you. How does the voting process work for the World Zionist Congress? Who is eligible to vote in these elections, which I know is controversial as well. So tell us about it.
So nothing about this is not controversial. No, it's the process itself is in theory very straightforward, although there have been some technical difficulties, but hopefully resolved by now. So voting opened on March 10th and it goes through May 4th. So it's a several week process, which is great. It means that we all have plenty of time to not only vote, but to tell as many people as possible to also get out and vote. And it's all online. So I know that the IPF site is in the chat and I think has a link to the voting website on it, but in case you need it, it is zionistelection.org. You can go there and the election is now open, so you can register and vote all in one go if you haven't already registered. Thank you for putting that website in the chat as well. There is a $5 registration fee, covers basically the cost of holding the elections in the first place. Once you register, you get a PIN, and that's what you'll need to vote. From what I understand, that is where a lot of the technical difficulties have come in with people not getting their PINs. But if you, for whatever reason, have had some technical difficulties or find yourself having said technical difficulties, don't give up. Please, this vote is too important. Don't give up. Wait a day, see if it comes through. If you're not getting it, at the bottom of the Zionist Election website, there is a contact the help desk email and phone number. So reach out to them if you need to. You can also reach out to the slates if you need to. And in order to vote, you have to be Jewish. So that's thing number one. This is the Jewish people's, election. You have to be 18 and you'll have to have turned 18 by June 30th, I believe. You have to be a US citizen or permanent resident whose primary residence is in this country. You have to have not voted in the most recent Knesset election. As we've already laid out, the Israeli third of this Congress is based on the Knesset election. So if you voted in that election, it's sort of like getting 2 votes. So if you voted in the most recent Knesset election, you can't vote in this. And then the last part of it is that you have to sign on to say that you accept the Jerusalem program. And that is basically a statement that says that you support the idea that Zionism is the national liberation movement of the Jewish people and that Israel should be secure, Jewish, and democratic. Pretty much in line with, I think, where most of us are anyway, so shouldn't be a hard thing to sign on to. And that's what you got to do to vote. And it's really, technical difficulties aside, it's a very easy process. So I just hope you will all do that and encourage everybody else to do it as well.
Thanks, Talia. Next question is for Lauren. Why are the World Zionist Congress elections important for shaping global Jewish policy and priorities, particularly in 2025?
Yeah, so I think first and foremost, I think as Roy mentioned, it's over $1 billion in money, and that is really going to shape priorities. Like if we have a lot of great ideas, I know between the 4 slates, we have a lot of things that we want to accomplish, and money is one of the best ways to get that done. And I think I saw in the Q&A an answer about what the other side, quote unquote, wants. And I think this is a good opportunity to talk about that. There's a lot of slates on the quote unquote other side that are frankly opposed to a 2-state solution. They are explicitly or implicitly opposed to religious pluralism, opposed to democracy, have some ideas about judicial reform that I think the 5 of us object to put it mildly. And so for us to have these folks have control over these institutions that control such a large amount of money for one, but such powerful institutions for two, we just find that unacceptable. And then in the last election in 2020, I think only 2% of the American Jewish community turned out. And so that is what a lot of these more right-wing slates, frankly, got elected. And so that's part of what the drama has been over how do we have this more liberal Jewish community in the United States and that tension between the diaspora and Israel over priorities. So the elections matter just like on a basic level for that, of having an institution truly be reflective of the communities that live here in the diaspora, and having a better set of priorities for these institutions going forward. Who's in charge? I think, as we have seen here, these institutions don't seem to matter. You're like, okay, so it's this like random office and this random administrator, like, okay, but like, okay, those administrators and those random institution heads actually really matter for guardrails and that kind of thing. So we had a chance to have a say in who gets to be in those positions. And given the trajectory of some of these issues we've seen in Israel and Israel diaspora relations, like it would be helped to have some like normal people in charge. And so that's what we're all here to represent, is some kind of normalcy.
Thanks for that, Lauren. And before I ask my next question, I just want to name that Rory mentioned there are coalitions that are created once people are in the World Zionist Congress. So it's very likely that many of the people here and many of those on a variety of slates that sort of share our values align will be collaborating, cooperating, and working together after the World Zionist Congress. So I do want to name it at the onset, but I also want to ask you guys what led to you joining your specific slate, what led to you getting involved in the World Zionist Congress in general, beyond what we've discussed, and whoever wants to go first is welcome to.
I'm happy to kick it off just so that we don't have awkward silence anymore. So, I think we've already talked about how this election is so little known, and it's really a wild thing how few American Jews know about it. For reference, I grew up in a very engaged modern Orthodox community. I went to day school for 14 years. My great-grandfather was a delegate in 1911 and 1913. I did not know this was still a thing that existed until like the last election in 2020. So so it's really just a wild thing. I joined the slate in 2020 through my involvement with J Street. And J Street is an endorsing organization of the Hatikva slate. And it's a problem and it's a shame. There are so many American Jews who are told that we don't get to have a say in what happens in Israel. But it's the national homeland of the Jewish people, and we do. And this is our built-in systemic say in what happens in Israel, and also how Israel, interacts with the Jewish community worldwide. This is not just what happens in Israel; it is global Jewish concern as well. So, I think I can't stress again how important it is to vote and to get the word out. And I think, this has been said already, but I'm going to just say it again because it's so important. The fact that the American Jewish community writ large is a liberal Jewish community. We are liberal Zionists, we are liberal, period. And the turnout in this election historically has not reflected that. And we need to do a better job at making sure that people are aware that this is a democratic process that they can participate in. So that is my charge to everybody tuning in today, is get the word out.
Thanks, Talia. Rory, I know you're very passionate about this since you started your own slate. So do you want to go next?
So I also actually learned about it in 2020. Talia, I think because of Hatikva, because I saw a tweet about it that encouraged people to vote, and nobody in my environment had talked about it at all. So I was like, wait, let's follow this link. And I voted, and then I waited for the results. And when the results came in, and if I remember correctly, 130,000 people voted. And I saw that, and I just like quickly did the math in my head, and I was like, wait, this is a single digit voter turnout, which for a Jewish community like ours, which is so civically involved otherwise, in like across the spectrum, um, I was shocked. I was like, I don't understand why nobody knows this exists, especially because we all learn about it. Like everybody knows about Herzl and the original Congress and well, a lot of people know about the Uganda plan and the arguments and I was like, okay, so it's still around. And why aren't we talking about it? And why aren't we screaming about it from the rooftops? Like really, it was like, wait, there's a very important issue here of these institutions that are shaping the trajectory of the Jewish future. And nobody knows. Like, including people, I had a conversation a few months ago with somebody very high up in a Jewish institution. And they were like, wait, the Congress still exists. I'm like, not only does it still exist, it actually funds your job. Like, it isn't like, and they didn't know. And, they turned to me, I was like, I don't understand. I'm a Jewish super user. How have I never voted? And I think there are many theories about why it isn't more publicly known. But I will say, because of to go back to the question about the other side, their showing in 2020 was the first time that, at least on the American side, the right-leaning slates took power in a way that they had never done in the 120 years of this Congress, um, because they got the word out. They actually went through their institutions and made sure that people knew that this mattered. And I will say, and it's really sad, they ran a campaign of fear and division. And I one of the things that I really want to follow up on what Lauren said, part of what is at stake is that they are seeking to narrow the definition of who counts as a Jew, specifically to reduce the power of the American Jewish community. And I think that's something that isn't talked about as much, because I think the liberal slates, we're not trying to lead with fear mongering and with, oh no, look at what the other side is trying to do, but we have to name it, because I was just in Israel with some of the other slates from that side, and they are very explicit about trying to redefine who counts as a Jew. And if they succeed, then in 2030 at the next election, a lot of people might not be able to vote. Like, as Talia mentioned, about like all you have to do is check a box that says you're Jewish. This time, we have no idea what they'll do if they attain even greater power.
Thanks, Rui. I don't know if others, Lauren and Javi, want to add, but I'll add on the second question, and you can answer whichever one you'd like, which are, what are the key issues you hope to address through your involvement? So if any of you want to speak a little bit more about your platforms, I know there's a lot of overlap, which I think is fantastic. You can speak out what is unique on yours, or just speak about some of the important components of your Slate's platform in general.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in on this. So my slate, I think, is a little bit different from the other three slates. We're more of the Jewish future is more of a centrist slate. I think the three of you would identify yours slates as more progressive. And I love that you guys progressive, left, center left. Rowie, I see your face. But we're a little bit more centrist liberal Zionism. We are affiliated with Yesh Atid. Yair Lapid actually put out a video and supporting us. And something that I have been thinking about a lot, my politics tend to be center left, but I feel very strongly about building up back the center. And I know for a lot of people in the Jewish community, they feel like they don't necessarily have a home because they feel the very left and the very right aren't necessarily for them. But we can be a home for you there. We are obviously supportive of a two-state solution, and something that has really spoken to me about our Slate's platform is the issues around education and the accessibility of education. I had my first kid last year, and the accessibility of Jewish education and, Zionist education too, something it's expensive, and it's kind of hard to get to. There's a touch of classism, I think, in how people get to it, and camp and all of that. And something that this slate wants to do in particular is reduce the barriers to this kind of education, and also make Zionist education more approachable, and less silly. And that's something that's really important to me. My son is a little cool little dude, and I want him to have a Zionism that is not nuts, not necessarily reflective of, the very, very far right and its exclusionariness, and the very, very far left, which doesn't endorse that at all. So that's, I think, something that differentiates us a little bit from some of the other slates. But you guys are all up to cool things. But that's the thing that I think is a little bit different about us. We're very inclusive, and want to try and be a big tent, explicitly want to be a big tent of a lot of different things.
Thanks, Lauren. I'm going to ask Javi to go next because you're part of like a very specific religious movement. And I also want to name that, and I'll post a link for Merkaz, which is the conservative movement. They weren't able to join us, but they're also running as a religious movement. So, like, Javi, go ahead.
Awesome. Thanks, Shani. Yeah, so gonna say a few things about the reform movement. So I was an Ohio organizer at the RAC, which is the Religious Action Center, the social justice branch of the Union for Reform Judaism. And while I was at the RAC, I saw this incredible infrastructure. It was the way that so many synagogues, most Reform synagogues are connected to the URJ in some form. So if you pay synagogue dues, for example, that usually goes to the URJ to make sure that we have a central body and social justice support, a whole load of things. One of them being ARZA, which is kind of this body of the URJ that does the World Zionist Congress. So in the reform movement, I saw this incredible infrastructure. And when I was thinking about wanting to run for World Zionist Congress, I chose the reform slate because it has this critical mass. We are in every state, we're all over the United States, and seeing the way in which our organizers at the Religious Action Center could really leverage the lay leaders at each synagogue to do statewide issues. So, for example, in Ohio, we were working on gerrymandering as a Jewish issue, and there's been work on gun violence and reproductive rights, etc. So this infrastructure of lay leaders that already has all this practice and dedication to organizing, really just leveraging that same infrastructure to bring folks to the attention of how Israel plays a role in our Reformed Jewish lives. I think anti-Semitism often creates this dynamic where Jews are often implicated in the decisions of the Israeli government, and obviously it shouldn't be this way at all. Every Jew really has the right to determine their own relationship to Israel. I'll say for me, and another reason I wanted to run with the reform movement is it's the first place that I saw multiracial, multi-ethnic, multilingual Jews. It was the first place I saw lots of Latino Jews. I'm a Mexican Jew, and that was super exciting to know. There are whole communities of us. And so really maintaining that religious pluralism is at the core of the reform slate. So I think vote reform one has this infrastructure of, okay, we want to maintain the reform movement in Israel, not just as a place to worship, but as a place to take seriously female rabbis and take seriously Jews who grew up with a dad who's Jewish and a mom who's not. My own family, my father is an Ashkenazi Jew from Cleveland, Ohio, and my mom was born into a Catholic family in Guadalajara, Mexico. And I was raised in a Jewish household. My mother never converted, but nothing about my household was anything but Jewish religiously. And so making sure that Jews like me who have been involved our entire lives in the Jewish institutional world get a voice in what is Israel and what is Reform Judaism. And Rowie, I think you named something really important, which is this limitation, this attempt to limit the definition of who is a Jew. So if we are not really paying attention to this pro-democracy coalition and maintaining our numbers in this pro-democracy coalition, then we lose people who, like me, who are very much a Jew, but in some places would not be considered so. I'll just give one last example about kind of the reform movement. There was an interesting, challenging proposal that came before the KKL board, and a few folks have mentioned KKL. It's the Jewish National Fund, but in Israel and not in the United States, to put it simply. And so the KKL has a ton of landmarks and memorials throughout Israel, and this seemingly innocent proposal came to the board to make a memorial to fallen soldiers in an East Jerusalem neighborhood, Sheikh Jarrah. And I'm sure a lot of you have heard of this place. It is a hotbed for clashes with Orthodox Jews and Palestinian residents. And some Orthodox Jews are kind of moving into that neighborhood to change the demographics. And so this seemingly innocent proposal to restore a memorial plaque to fallen soldiers. Actually, like if you read the fine print, it outlined this much larger plan to turn the site into an amphitheater where hundreds of people could come, and it would have been used by this community to hold nationalist rallies and harass local Palestinians. And so having the presence of this amphitheater would create bloodshed, and sometimes what goes on in Sheikh Jarrah amplifies into regional escalation. And so because of the World Zionist Congress votes, the reform movement had folks in the room, had those seats, had a critical mass to read the fine print and shut that down. But we only have that pro-democracy majority by 1 seat. So that's why I chose to go with a slate that just is really well established and has that infrastructure to get that critical mass in the room.
Thanks, Javi. Talia, you want to go next?
Sure, thank you. I think I want to echo, Lauren, you said we're all doing cool things. I like that. I agree with that. But I do think there are a few reasons, why I specifically chose to run with Hatikva. And I think, this is now my second time joining the Hatikva slate. I was on it in 2020 as well. And I'm so glad that my voice is represented in this way. Our slate is made up of a broad coalition of liberal and progressive American Jews, whatever, designation you want to give yourself. But a broad coalition of liberal and progressive American Jews that works toward an Israel that lives up to its highest values. We're committed to preserving Israel's democracy and rule of law, to promoting equal rights for all, regardless of race or religion or denomination or gender or sexuality or anything else. We are committed to pushing for a two-state solution, and we are against any sort of annexation or occupation. And I believe we are the only slate that explicitly states that we're against the occupation and for a diplomatic solution with internationally recognized borders. I think especially in light of the news this week and the resumed airstrikes, and the pushback that we've subsequently seen from Israelis across the country, I'm really proud to say that we stand with the hostage families in working to bring back the remaining hostages and to reach an end to the war, and also very specifically to help communities impacted both in the Gaza envelope and in the north rebuild or resettled. We are aligned with the Democratic Party in Israel, which is led by Yair Golan, who you may have seen as a hero on October 7th and a since fierce voice in opposition to the machinations of the Netanyahu efforts. These are the types of pragmatic, but also hopeful policy positions that I think are really entirely in line with the rest of the work that I do on this issue, whether it's with J Street or with IPF. It's a direct expression of my Zionism. I think it feels extra meaningful to me. I mentioned earlier my great-grandfather was a delegate, so being able to participate in this way is just really special for me personally. I think in general, Hatikva, the word means hope. It's our national anthem. Hatikva is the party of hope and action combined. Israel has always been a land of dreamers and doers, and we need that hope now more than ever, alongside the actions that carry out, all the hopes that we hold. Our investments, the $5 billion that this election will represent, it's $1 billion over 5 years, every year over 5 years. Our investments are a reflection of our values. So, I think my goal is to make sure that as much of that money is invested wisely with hope for a better future and a more just future. So for me, a vote for Hatikva is a vote for hope. And I can talk a little bit about the key issues that I'm hoping. I don't want to take more time than. I think one thing we look at very closely, a few folks have already mentioned Kakal, JNF Kakal, and that is, as Rowie said, controls a lot of the land in Israel on both sides of the Green Line, by the way. So that is a key component here. There's also the settlement division of the World Zionist Organization, which controls land use and land appropriation. So things like that impact things like the Israeli-Palestinian conflict for sure, but also, like I mentioned earlier, the rebuilding or resettling of communities in the North and in the South post October 7th. That's something we're really hoping to, be able to help push. Another thing is, Rowie, I think, also mentioned the Jewish Agency. They are responsible for sending shlichim around the world. These are representatives of Israel who go around the world and are embedded in Jewish communities at day camps, at synagogues. The budget process and the policy process that controls who the shlichim are and where they are sent ensures that they reflect the diversity of global Jewry. That's a huge deal. So that's something that we look to have a hand in. And then just generally also, I know Rowie mentioned the lack of transparency and how the money is used in all of this. Something we have been working on and hope to continue working on is increasing transparency. So that's a thing we would like. We've made some progress there, but we would love to see a little bit more of that come into play. And we're hoping that we can be a part of that by sharing out information and updates on a regular basis on what we're working on in between elections. And that's I think, we have these elections every 5 years, and there's like a little bit of a reinventing of the wheel of, okay, now we have to get back together and do this. And if we can continue to keep people informed in between election cycles, I think that might help people get more engaged, stay more engaged, and come back to vote next time around. So that's a thing we are really hoping to focus on as well.
Thanks, Talia. Rory?
So I think I love this webinar, and I love these representatives because I think if you would go to our platforms, you'd see that we actually use a lot of shared language and we have a lot of similar priorities, and many of our plans align, and that's why we'll be working together. I saw there was a question about what differentiates us. And I think for Anu, the reason I started this slate as opposed to joining a slate was I've been involved in, I'll tie it into another question, which is like, what about our slate members and what are our qualifications? I've been involved in Jewish community for a while. The impetus for starting a new slate was I was actually at the Jewish Agency's Board of Governors last year, the first Board of Governors after October 7th. And one of the things I realized in that room, right, is 50% of the board is allocated according to this election. And as an observer being there, I realized that I was there with JFNA's National Leadership Cabinet. There were 20 of us, and we brought the average age of the Board of Governors down by several decades. And I was engaged in these conversations with people who have really, and I don't think we can underestimate it, who have made a massive difference in helping the viability of Israel over decades. But that was the issue. Over decades. I spoke to somebody who was invited onto the Board of Governors by David Ben-Gurion, who none of us were alive when he was alive. And it made me realize that thank you for your service. We really, like, I mean it fully. Thank you for your service, decades of service. But maybe it was time for younger people to have a seat at the table. And so Anu was started because it was time for people to stop talking about us and for us to be at the table where these discussions are being made. Anu is very proudly, 50% of us will be under 35 by the Congress. I think we are by far the youngest slate outside of Am Yisrael Chai, but we will not get into them. And also, we are a majority women's slate. We have more women than men, which I think is actually pretty rare in the among slates. And what we are, and to Lauren's post, because we're not a progressive slate, we are a big tent. One of the things I really wanted, and I very much appreciate the reform movement because Lord knows we have a lot to thank them for. But I really wanted to break out of our denominational and ideological silos. Anu was created as a big tent to unite people. We have Orthodox members, Reform members, we have conservative members, and we have cultural Jews who had never thought about the Jewish world until they went on Birthright. We have patrilineal Jews and halachic Jews, and we have the entire rainbow of Jewish organizations represented. But more than anything, we are an entirely volunteer slate. We are all lay-led. I, I, I somewhat joke that we have no budget, we have no offices, and we have no staff, which differentiates us from every other slate because we're talking about money a lot and we're talking about budgets. And the one thing that Anu doesn't want or need is a budget. There's nothing when we talk about the practicality of the Congress and we reach these coalition agreements, the one thing nobody can offer Anu is money for buildings or positions at the Jewish Agency or the World Zionist Organization because we all have day jobs. All of us are here at Anu to push the policies that I actually think we're almost all in agreement with. Pluralism, peoplehood, and a secure Jewish and democratic Israel through a two-state solution. And when you vote for Anu, you are voting for that policy and nothing else. I can actually make that promise both as the founder and executive director that we don't have any ulterior motives. We have no synagogues to fund or youth movements to fund or camps to fund. And not a single one of the 116 people on Anu is moving to Israel to be the Jewish agency's Shinshinim head or the WZO's, that's my favorite, Zionist Enterprise Department chair. Really, we need such better marketing. But so that's one of the things that really differentiates Anu. We are younger than almost, we are 100% Gen Z, millennial, and yes, we have two exennials. We have to. My long running joke is that we are young for Jewish leadership because go to any Jewish institutional board meeting, and if you see anybody under 50, that is surprising, and they're usually at the kids' table. Aside from IPF, by the way, shout out to the IPF board, which actually has younger people, millennials. No Gen Z yet. We'll get there. But that's one of the things that we do. We are a big tent of volunteers who really strongly believe in the things that we actually all share. And I very much look forward to working with the slates on here. And to go back to the question, like, you should vote for one of us. I would love if you voted for Anu, but vote and vote for one of these 5 slates. We will give Merkaz the shout out, even though they're not here. But vote for us because we will represent your values. I would love if you voted for us for the reasons I mentioned before, but just vote. Please vote.
Thanks, Rowie. Definitely supportive of having everybody vote. If anyone has questions about how to vote, let me know. You can reach out directly. There was a question about qualifications. If anyone else wants to answer, I mean, folks are also welcome to go and look at the slates. You can see everyone's slates, everyone's platform is the list of who's on. There are lots of prominent rabbis and community leaders on all 4 slates represented here. So I highly recommend that you go and take a look at that. There's a question about how slates plan to partner with Arab Israelis if they get elected. I do want to name that only Jews are eligible for World Zionist Congress. But obviously, since there are Arab Israelis in the Knesset, they also sit in the, I guess, World Zionist Congress because they're in the Knesset. How does that work? Okay, someone answer this question who's not me.
I'm gonna let Talia take this because I think she has the most experience.
No, I was going to nominate you to answer.
Okay, wait.
Go
One
for
thing
it.
I forgot about the last question when we were talking about qualifications, like our slate has Israeli Americans. I think we might be the only slate that actually has a hostage family member on it. We have national security experts. We have people who are in, like I mentioned, but really every Jewish organization you can think of is represented on ANU. Almost. I guess I don't think I have anyone from the Orthodox Union. That's going to be my one. But so because you have to be explicitly Zionist to be part of the World Zionist Congress, the Arab parties are not included, which actually leads to a very complicated situation that I was really hoping Talia had the answer for, because it changes the makeup of the Israeli delegation to the Congress. So instead of the proportion being like out of 120, I think Israel gets 200 seats, right, Javi? Um,
Israel gets 200 delegates.
okay. Perfect. Thank you. Um, so instead of it being the proportional, like from 120 to 200, they actually do the proportion taking out the Arab parties. Because you have to be explicitly Zionist, technically speaking, if one of the Arab parties chose to accept the Jerusalem program, they would be eligible. One actually really interesting thing. So the Congress can only do so much about shared society with um, with Arab Israelis or Palestinian citizens of Israel. One thing it does, to Talia's point earlier about the Jewish Agency, there is a project that, because of the last election, is currently on the chopping block that the Jewish Agency runs called Project 10, which outside brings Israelis to Jewish communities around the world. And it's this beautiful thing where they work on shared values projects, and they teach the local language, or they teach Hebrew or English. But in Israel, Project 10 brings Jews and non-Jews together. And it is currently on the chopping block because of the quote unquote other side. The other very interesting thing that happened last week that's related to this is actually United Torah Judaism has told its people that it does not support the World Zionist Congress and that they should not vote in it because they are not Zionists. So it's not just the Arab parties that are currently put like out of the Congress. If they follow the Gaon, then actually a big part of the Jewish representation of the Knesset might not be at the Congress, which would be lovely.
I just want to add a couple of things onto that, and thank you for that, Rowie. Um, First of all, just in terms of the question about the Arab, representation, Rowie is 100% right in all of that. I think one of the things that the Hitik Slate and the rest of us, but I know that this is in our platform, is to push for, just generally equality and equal access, and so we will push for policies and push for, programs and actions that will impact those communities, even if they are not represented. And so that's an important thing to know. The other thing I just will add on the United Torah Judaism front, is that there is also a sort of conflict among some American, very right-wing Jews, who would not consider themselves Zionists, about whether to vote or not. And a lot of their leaders come out and tell them vote anyway, click the I agree to the Jerusalem program statement box anyway, because they recognize how important these elections are in controlling everything that they control. And I will just say, I know this does not apply to any of the folks on this panel, and I don't know if it applies to any of the folks tuning in today, but there are some folks on the left who similarly feel a little bit uncomfortable with signing on to the Jerusalem program for lack of comfort with associating with Zionism. And if you wind up speaking to any of those people, and that's their one holdup, tell them that the right doesn't care. This is vital. Don't let that be a reason that somebody doesn't vote. This is still a voice that will be saying that they are speaking for them. So don't let them sit it out.
Thanks, Talia. Lauren, Javi, do you guys have anything to add before we wrap up? Any thoughts on the Congress itself, your slate, anything you want to share?
Yeah. So just kind of going off of the conversation about how we would work with Arab Israelis, I think we would take the lead of Yesh Atid. Also, the Jewish Future Slate is, again, it's rejecting extremism, and the extremism of the very far right is really, really concerning. And then, again, I know some people aren't necessarily super comfy with what they feel and what they see on the news about the left. So, like, again, you're home. And my slate is really, really interesting. It's a lot of young, exciting leadership. I think a third of us, 40% of us, are under 35, which is pretty rad. And we're like dead split 50-50 between men and women too, which is also really cool. It's a bit of an unusual slate, and I'm like really, really proud to be a part of that. So I would be thrilled if you voted for us, although I don't think you can necessarily go wrong with any of the folks on this webinar.
Thanks, Lauren. Yeah, the thing I'll add is I've had some folks when I've told them, hey, like come vote reform, say actually I really don't feel comfortable with the Jerusalem with the Jerusalem Declaration, and something specific people talk about is the line where it says settling the land. And this fear that settling the land automatically means settling in what could potentially in the future be a Palestinian state. And so I talked to them about the KKL, and I talked to them about the ways in which our participation here actually dictates like where are we building, where are we stopping, what are the things that we can catch before they're making even more obstacles to a two-state solution. So vote reform really has that infrastructure to have those seats at the table at Kakal, at the Jewish Agency. So that's why I'm super excited about the opportunity for not just vote reform, but this pro-democracy coalition we're building to get us to a place, this is all learned from IPF, right? Get us to a place where we have laid the foundation for a two-state outcome to be successful.
Thanks, Javi. I think we answered all the questions in the Q&A, but I just want to make sure everyone watching actually goes and votes right now. And you can take a look at the website that I posted, which I'm going to post one more time, which is on the IPF site, has links to everyone else's slate. It has links to all the platforms. It has an FAQ section. It also lists all of our town halls in Boston, LA, New York, DC, Chicago, and San Francisco, where we're going to have panels just like this one, but in person. So if you know somebody who's in those cities and missed this, they can come. It'll be different panelists in every single city, but all of these slates will be represented, I think, in every city. So they should go to that. But please vote. It's super important. And we're just, again, as Israel Policy Forum, we're really proud that our leaders are so involved and so active in mobilizing support for secure Jewish democratic Israel at the World Zionist Congress. It's really exciting for us. And I feel really privileged to be able to convene these kind of spaces so that people can share and get the word out. So thank you guys all for running on your slates. Thank you for promoting this extremely, extremely important issue for our community. Have a great day, everybody.